So it's been a while since I've had a really fun brawl in World of Warships, especially these days at high tier. We all know how passive it can get. So today we're just going to send it in the Kurfürst. This ship is pretty mediocre these days, fairly power crept. Its massive strength is its close quarters brawling ability. Of course, that is not easy to do these days. But today we are going to actually make it work, and there's even carriers in this game and a submarine. Fortunately though, the sub is on the other flank, and the carrier is a tier 8. There's several things that are required to actually get into a brawl these days, and it really helps that you don't have to deal with the higher tier carriers and subs. Because of course, as you're pushing in, you become the easiest target to go after and focus on. So you don't really want to be putting yourself out there like that in this game. It's really, really bad for just having any sort of battle impact. It becomes very, very easy to die. The other thing I wanted to just mention quick is based on the enemy's spawn and our spawn. A lot of times the games are reasonably well balanced as far as where ships spawn. So since I spawned relatively alone towards the, B7 square I think is where I was spawning, C7 maybe somewhere in there. That means that more than likely on the enemy team, they also had only one battleship spawn there, and that was the Tirpitz that we saw. So I didn't really have to worry about the enemy team having a ton of ships to the south of C to farm me out. There's just a Sherman here, which isn't too big of a deal, especially since he's going with sap into my bow-on ship. That's not a huge deal. Really, the pain point or the thing we have to deal with is the enemy team on the 9-10 lines. Of course, the people that spawn middle and towards the A-cap, they're not really much of a threat to us. So we have to angle towards the guys on the 9-10 line. Having a Hydro, getting this Holland spotted, which I think is what our friendly Holland ended up doing actually, not our Hydro. But having a Hydro is so nice as you're pushing in like this. The full YOLO is much better in the Kurfürst. I often say that the Ohio is going to be a better brawler. Just overall, it's just a better ship than the Kurfürst is. Better guns. I think it's a little tougher to kill thanks to a smaller superstructure and a fast cooldown heal. But I won't lie, pushing in like this, having a Hydro is extremely valuable. It gets this Sherman spotted. It makes me so confident when I'm pushing in that I know where the torps are coming from. I know this Holland wasn't able to get a torp angle on us. Something else we're going to be looking for in this cap is just how many little islands there are to avoid torpedo angles. And that's going to come up in a little bit once we deal with another DD. But this Tirpitz is doing a decent job of hiding away from us, but we're still able to do some pretty decent damage into him. At close range, as you can see, German battleships, they can do some serious damage. It feels pretty good at closer ranges. It's as we get into those longer range scenarios that Kurfürst doesn't quite feel as good. With the enemy team winning, or mostly winning, the 9-10 lines, I'm starting to think about retreating a little bit. Don't need to be this far pushed up. This is a great... If I push into the enemy spawn, I'm probably just going to die to a lot of crossfire or some torpedoes that I wasn't really expecting. I never really want to push out of the cap zones and into the enemy spawn. I say this all the time, but it's just a great way to lose your ship very, very quickly. Now that we have the cap control, it also means that the enemy team will be forced to push into us, which means they'll be at a disadvantage. We can set up a nice ambush or start kiting away. It's again where Kurfürst is going to be stronger. Instead of pushing in, you will be a little bit stronger when you're kiting away from people. Still at relatively close ranges though. The turret angles are much better when you're looking back over your shoulder than when you're trying to push in. And I gotta say, while I was playing this game, it really reminded me of older World of Warships, where battleships could just push into caps like this pretty early on in games and do reasonably well. Maybe not this well all the time. You were still at a pretty massive disadvantage when you pushed in, but it was still a doable thing, and we saw it happen much more often. I really wish we could get back to more scenarios like that, and maybe not artificially buffing battleships to make them unkillable, even in the current meta. But I would love to see game modes that incentivized us to push in a little bit more and actually reward us for doing that. This domination game mode is a decent one for that, but typically it's better to let your DDs contest the caps while you're providing some longer range fire support, and then only commit your ship when it's really necessary. I'm talking about airship escort. Of course, you guys probably got that already. I really, really want to have that game mode back. Because these sorts of pushes would happen in that game mode with both teams. It wouldn't just be me pushing in like this. We'd find other Kurfürsts, Schlieffens all pushing into the cap, and it'd be one massive mess of battleships and secondaries and torps. Oh, so fun. I really, really wish we could get that game mode back, especially if it would just come into the random rotation, maybe rotate out arms race. I don't know, that's maybe wishful thinking, but I just love this closer range action. I like it so much more. It feels a lot more like what the marketing material is too. I don't know if you guys have looked at this. It seems like the marketing typically shows pretty close range engagements, don't you think? A lot of brawling going on between a lot of ships. And I think it is possible in this game still, as we can see in this match. We happen to be able to do it. And I just want to see more game modes that allow that to happen more often. That's what I'd like to see. But you guys probably also feel the same way. Probably not talking to the right people about that. It's probably more on Wargaming to make those changes. But I hope we can see that in the future sometime. Maybe 6 months from when we had Airship Escort. Maybe a year. We had Airship Escort, of course, at the very beginning of this year. So I would hope by summer they would recognize that that was such a popular thing and then maybe add it back into the game. We'll see though. That might just be wishful thinking. Hydro, of course, massively useful there into that Kagero, helping us take him out. You notice that I was pushing broadside to that Kagero as well. Again, I just want to mention how powerful those islands are. Those little islands that allow you to just cut off a lot of torpedo angles. And here as well, I don't think the Tirpitz quite had an angle for torps on us, so we do manage to safely take him out, and then just move on to dealing with the enemy ships that did push our spawn. I don't know why it's so popular to push spawns these days, but it seems like it happens a lot. Whenever an enemy team gets a bit of an advantage, they just continue pushing into the enemy spawn. And it really just never works out, at least as far as I've seen. Maybe there's 1 in 100 games that it can work out, but I don't really see it. I really don't. We do get pretty lucky there. It is a Minotaur. It tends to explode, of course, but GK guns, not the most accurate or reliable all the time, even though we do have a bit of a gun build. I'll go over the captain build at the end. I'm rocking a bit of a weird commander setup. I'll explain that a little bit more later. But we managed to eat both Sherman torps. Even with Hydro, so not the most maneuverable ship in the world when we're slow. But since the Sherman's the only one spotting us, we don't need to shoot this. We can just go dark and not allow him to farm us. And we'll get out of his gunfire and it'll be just fine. So that's the GK. We managed to full send it into the C cap here and actually do reasonably well. I was pretty surprised. It typically doesn't go this well when I full send it early game. Sometimes late game we can still have some brawls, but early game, yeah, that's usually a recipe for a disaster. Broadside Lexington at max range. I didn't quite have enough time to line it up. I think it was a bit of a snapshot, so we'll see how it ends up going here. But Lexington does have a pretty big citadel. Unfortunately, though, we aren't actually able to hit it. Or maybe we did and didn't pen. You can see those 2 torp protection hits, which is unfortunate. But still a awesome game and a ton of fun to be had in the Kurfürst if you get the right matchmaker. And get a little bit lucky as well, I won't lie. So the build I'm running is definitely a little bit weird, but the idea is we want secondaries for the matches that we can actually brawl and push in with. Adrenaline Rush is just too good to not give up. And then Fire Prevention basically required on battleships these days. The rest of it is based around the idea that a lot of times I'm going to be dying to carriers, and I can stay far enough back in most games to survive a lot of other incoming damage. Carrier damage, sub damage can be helped a little bit with some of these airstrike armament reload times and these kind of skills here. But the idea really is around that. I want to live through the most annoying parts of the game that are basically unavoidable. And then I can deal with worse concealment, I can deal with 1 less heal, but I still want to gain the secondaries here. That said, this is not an optimal build at all. This is very much splitting our focus too much that we don't have an optimal brawling build and we don't have an optimal surviving, tanking, long range kind of build. and that typically doesn't go very well. But I'm trying it right now. We'll see what I end up with. You guys who have watched the channel for a while probably know I like to mess around with these secondary builds a lot. I'm almost always changing them, maybe even match to match. Not even, I don't think this build will last particularly long, but it's what I'm messing with right now. I'm also messing with it on the Ohio. It's a little better there since our AA is better there overall. Upgrades look a little bit like this for now. Propulsion mod can be very useful at times. You just need to make sure you're in the right positions to use it. But otherwise, we do have a pretty normal build here. Still going main guns, accuracy, and reload. Trying to maximize that as much as possible. Because at the end of the day, most of the damage does come from your main guns, even with secondary builds. It's really all about those main guns for the most part on battleships, and that's what we're going to try and buff the most. So there you go. A GK game where we actually got to brawl like the good old times of, I don't even know what year, but it was a while ago since I was really able to feel like I could just send it in the GK and have a good time most of the time. But I enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.